This is the moment Iran lost the one weapon it believed the world could never take away from it. If you look at the Strait of Hormuz right now, that narrow 33-kilometer corridor connecting the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world, you would not see what Iran promised you would see. You would not see Iranian Revolutionary Guard vessels commanding the passage. You would not see toll collectors turning back tankers that refuse to pay. You would see something Iran's leadership never prepared its people for. American warships clearing a path through waters Tehran claimed it owned, systematically dismantling the trap Iran spent months building, mine by mine, corridor by corridor, day by day. As of this morning, Friday, April 17, 2026, the United States has officially begun a major military operation to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran, which closed this waterway with enormous confidence just 47 days ago, does not have the military capability to stop it. Not anymore. In this deep dive, we are going to break down exactly what this U.S. operation looks like on the water right now, why Iran's grip on the strait has collapsed faster than any military analyst predicted, what the mine crisis no one is talking about reveals about the true state of Iran's military, and what happens to global energy markets, to China, to Gulf states, and to Iran itself as this operation accelerates in the days ahead. Iran did not just lose a battle in the Strait of Hormuz. It lost the argument that closing the strait was ever a sustainable strategy, and what replaces Iranian control of that waterway is going to reshape the entire Middle East power map for the next generation. 47 days ago, Iran's plan looked brilliant, at least from Tehran. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, striking Iranian military facilities, nuclear sites, and government leadership in a coordinated campaign that killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and shattered Iran's conventional military command structure overnight. The plan Tehran had built for exactly this scenario activated immediately. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. The strategy was supposed to be unbeatable. Iran had spent 15 years preparing for this moment. It had stockpiled hundreds of naval mines across the strait's navigable shipping lanes. It had positioned fast attack boats, coastal missile batteries, and drone swarms along the Iranian coastline. It had drilled its Revolutionary Guard naval units on exactly how to deny access to the world's most important oil corridor. The message to Washington was simple: you can destroy our military, but if you do, we will take the global economy down with us. 20% of the world's seaborne oil supply passes through Hormuz. Iran's leadership gambled that no American president would risk a global economic catastrophe to press a military advantage. The original promise Iran made to itself was that the strait closure would give it leverage to demand a ceasefire on favorable terms, leverage to extract sanctions relief, leverage to preserve its nuclear program, and most critically, leverage to emerge from the conflict with control of the Strait of Hormuz, written into any peace agreement as a new permanent legal regime. Tehran's leadership told their own people the world would break before Iran did. But the cost of that gamble was deeper than they admitted. By closing the strait, Iran handed the United States a justification for the most decisive naval campaign in 21st century history. And by laying mines in international waters in a pattern that proved too complex to manage, Iran created a trap that eventually snapped shut on itself. Iran assumed the world's dependency on Hormuz oil would paralyze Washington. Iran assumed wrong. At 9:17 a.m. Gulf Standard Time on Saturday, April 11, 2026, two U.S. Navy destroyers moved. The USS Frank E. Peterson Jr. and the USS Michael Murphy entered the Strait of Hormuz, not through a coordinated arrangement with Tehran, not with Iranian permission, not after diplomatic clearance. They moved because Admiral Brad Cooper, commander of U.S. Central Command, had ordered what he described as the beginning of establishing a new passage, and because 6 weeks of sustained American air and naval operations had degraded Iran's ability to stop them to the point where threatening to stop them and actually stopping them had become two very different things. The Iranian response was immediate but revealing. Iranian state television broadcast that an American vessel had been warned and turned back. IRGC commanders issued statements declaring that the initiative for any movement through the strait remained entirely in Iranian hands. Strong language, familiar language, the same language Iran had been using since February 28th. But the USS Frank E. Peterson Jr. did not turn back. It transited the strait, operated in the Arabian Gulf, and returned. What followed that transit confirmed what military analysts had been quietly documenting for 2 weeks. While Iran's state media was broadcasting denial, U.S. Central Command was publishing footage of A-10 Thunderbolt jets destroying Iranian fast-attack watercraft in the strait. At that exact same moment, AH-64 Apache gunships were being deployed specifically to neutralize Iran's one-way drone attack capability, systematically dismantling the asymmetric threat layer that had made Iranian coastal control credible. Over 130 Iranian naval vessels had already been destroyed across the 6 weeks of the campaign. 44 mine-layer vessels, the boats Iran used to seed the strait with its underwater trap, had been eliminated. And most shockingly, the mine operation itself had turned into a catastrophe for Iran that nobody in Tehran was willing to say out loud. Pause. Iran had lost track of its own mines. Not all of them, but enough. The Revolutionary Guard had seeded the strait in a pattern so dense and so rapidly executed that their own tracking records had become unreliable. As of April 13th, 230 loaded oil tankers sat anchored inside the Persian Gulf, waiting, burning fuel, costing their owners tens of millions of dollars per day because even Iran could no longer guarantee where its own weapons were. The ceasefire signed on April 8th had required Iran to reopen the strait. Iran said it would. Abu Dhabi National Oil Company CEO Sultan Al Jaber confirmed publicly that the strait remained closed despite the ceasefire because Iran was still conditioning and restricting traffic. Iran had built a trap it could not escape. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, stood at a Pentagon podium on April 16th with a map of the Strait of Hormuz behind him and said 13 vessels had been turned back since the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports began on April 13th. 0 ships had broken through. The operation was working. While Iran was broadcasting defiance, American destroyers were already mapping the minefields from the inside. According to sources within the regional security community who have been tracking this operation since its planning stages, the decision to begin mine-clearing operations on April 11th was not spontaneous. It was the calculated endpoint of a deliberate pressure sequence that had been running for weeks. We have learned from sources familiar with CENTCOM planning that the mine-clearing operation had been gamed out in detail as far back as early March, when it became clear that Iran's closure of the strait was not going to be resolved through diplomacy alone. The targeting of Iran's 44 mine-layer vessels was not incidental to the air campaign. It was a primary objective, specifically designed to limit Iran's ability to reseed the strait once clearance operations began. Every mine-layer eliminated was one less obstacle standing between American mine clearance teams and an open corridor. The Islamabad talks on April 11th and 12th were the final diplomatic gate before the operation escalated. A senior U.S. official told reporters that the talks collapsed because Iran refused to cross 4 red lines set by the Trump administration: ending uranium enrichment, dismantling major enrichment facilities, surrendering highly enriched uranium stocks, and most critically, fully reopening the Strait of Hormuz without charging tolls. Iran had been charging vessels over $1 million per ship for passage through waters it claimed to control. Washington called that extortion. Tehran called it compensation for war damages. Inside the White House, the night the Islamabad talks failed, the decision was straightforward. JD Vance announced the failure on April 12th. Within hours, Trump declared the full naval blockade of Iranian ports and coastal areas. The operation that had been quietly running since April 11th became official policy. It was a cold, calculated decision. If Iran would not open the strait through negotiation, the United States would open it through force and lock Iran out of its own coastline simultaneously. Sources familiar with Iranian leadership communications in the days following describe a command structure in a state of profound disorientation. The officials who had built the entire strategic logic of the strait closure around the assumption that the United States would not pay the military and diplomatic price to challenge it were now watching that assumption disintegrate in real time. The situation reports reaching Tehran's remaining leadership were not about whether the U.S. operation could be stopped. They were about how much longer the pretense of control could be maintained. Why is Iran's grip collapsing so much faster than anyone expected? Follow the military math because it tells the whole story. Iran's entire Hormuz strategy rested on asymmetric capability. The idea that even a militarily inferior force could deny access to a narrow waterway through mines, fast boats, drones, and coastal missiles. This doctrine worked on paper. It worked in war games. It worked as a deterrent for 15 years because the United States never fully committed to dismantling it. Operation Epic Fury changed the calculation entirely. The U.S. did not simply attack Iran, it systematically targeted the components of Iran's asymmetric naval capability in sequence. Air defenses went first, allowing unrestricted strikes on coastal military infrastructure. Underground missile bunkers along the Iranian coast near the Strait were struck with GBU-72 5,000-pound penetrating munitions that went through layers of reinforced rock and concrete. The Bushehr naval base was destroyed. The IRGC command chain was fractured. The logistics pipelines feeding Hezbollah and Houthi proxy forces were severed. By the time American destroyers entered the Strait on April 11th, they were entering a corridor whose defensive architecture had been gutted from the outside in. The power shift here is enormous, and it operates on two levels simultaneously. On the military level, the United States has demonstrated that asymmetric denial strategies, the doctrine that weak states can hold vital waterways hostage against superior conventional forces, have a ceiling, and that ceiling is reachable when a great power commits fully to the problem. That is a message being heard in Pyongyang, in Beijing, and in Moscow right now with extraordinary clarity. On the legal and sovereignty level, the implications run even deeper. International maritime law is unambiguous. Any state that lays naval mines in international waters is legally responsible for their removal and for ensuring safe passage once hostilities end. Iran laid hundreds of mines. Iran then lost track of enough of them that it cannot certify the corridor as safe even if it wants to. The country whose naval forces map and clear those mines will possess the most detailed operational knowledge of that strait's hydrography in existence. That knowledge becomes a permanent form of technical authority over the passage that no treaty clause can override. The United States is not just reopening the strait, it is acquiring a generational claim to manage it. Here is the domino effect that is now running, and it moves faster than most people realize. If the United States successfully clears the minefields and establishes a verified safe corridor through Hormuz, it does not simply restore pre-war shipping conditions. It creates a new baseline in which American naval presence in and around the strait becomes the permanent operational guarantee of global energy security. Every tanker that passes through that cleared corridor will be passing through a passage that exists because of American military action. That is leverage that does not expire when the war ends. If that leverage holds, the entire framework of Iranian strategic deterrence collapses permanently. Iran spent 15 years building the Hormuz threat as its ultimate insurance policy. That policy has been canceled. No future Iranian government, whether this regime or whatever follows it, will be able to credibly threaten to close the strait again. The infrastructure for doing so has been destroyed. The mines that were laid have been located and cleared. The fast boats are gone. The coastal missile batteries have been struck. And the American Navy now has operational knowledge of the corridor that Iran's own forces no longer have. The deterrent is dead. While the U.S. operation moves forward in the strait, something is happening inside Iran's borders that the regime's public statements are designed to conceal. Iran has approximately 13 days of oil storage capacity remaining before it will be forced to begin shutting down oil fields. Shutting down oil wells is not like turning off a tap. It causes long-term geological damage that can reduce production capacity for years. Iran is not just losing revenue, it is potentially destroying the physical foundation of the economy it will need to rebuild when this conflict ends. At $13 billion in monthly oil revenue lost, every week of continued blockade is a wound that does not heal with a ceasefire. Where are Iran's allies in this moment? China vetoed the UN Security Council resolution that would have provided international legal cover for the blockade operation. But China's tankers are the ones sitting behind the minefield, unable to move the Iranian oil that Beijing's refineries need. Russia issued statements supporting Iran's position, but Russian energy companies are quietly benefiting from the oil price spike caused by Hormuz's closure. Iran's proxy network, Hezbollah, the Houthis, has been operationally degraded. The coalition of resistance that was supposed to make Iran untouchable is watching from the sidelines while the strait it was built to protect gets cleared by the adversary. And within Iran itself, a population already brought to the streets in 2022 is now living under the economic weight of a regime that promised the Hormuz strategy would bring victory and is watching it produce the opposite. The mines in the Strait of Hormuz are not just weapons, they are a symbol of everything that went wrong with Iran's strategy. They were laid in confidence, they were laid to send a message, and they ended up trapping their own creator inside a corridor they were meant to control. Iran wanted to use the strait as a weapon against the world. Instead, the world is now using the strait as a measuring stick for exactly how much of Iran's power remains, and the number is getting smaller every day. You can declare sovereignty over a waterway in a press conference. You cannot declare your mines away when you have lost track of where they are. You can issue warnings to American warships through state television. You cannot stop those warships with warnings when your naval capability has been reduced to a fraction of what it was 47 days ago. The reality of what Iran built over 15 years and what 6 weeks of American military operations has dismantled is not a matter of narrative. It is a matter of what is on the water and what is no longer on the water. So where does this leave every player right now? Iran's leadership is caught in a trap of its own making that is tightening by the day. It cannot reopen the strait fully because it does not know where all its own mines are. It cannot resist the American mine-clearing operation because it does not have the naval assets to do so. It cannot negotiate from strength because 13 ships have been turned back by the blockade and 0 have broken through. Every option Iran had when it closed the strait on February 28th has been systematically eliminated. What remains is the choice between a negotiated exit that concedes American demands or a continued standoff that compounds irreversible economic and military damage with every passing week. In the weeks ahead, expect Iran to attempt to frame any diplomatic resolution as a victory, a ceasefire it chose, terms it shaped, a new legal regime for the strait that preserves some symbolic measure of Iranian dignity. Expect Iranian state media to amplify every minor friction in the U.S. operation, every diplomatic statement from Russia or China, every voice in the international community that questions American military action, building a domestic narrative of resistance even as the physical reality of the strait tells the opposite story. Expect Tehran to reach back to Beijing through back channels it cannot publicly acknowledge, asking for diplomatic cover that China will be increasingly reluctant to provide as its own energy security continues to suffer. But what cannot be undone, regardless of what any ceasefire agreement says or any UN resolution declares, is the operational reality now taking shape in those 33 kilometers of water. American mine clearance vessels, armed with the most advanced underwater mapping technology in existence, are building a detailed hydrographic record of the Strait of Hormuz that will exist in U.S. military databases for the next 50 years. The country that clears those mines owns that knowledge. The country that owns that knowledge does not need a treaty to justify its presence in those waters. Iran's Hormuz strategy was built on the belief that the world needed the strait more than America needed to challenge Iran. What the last 47 days have proven is the opposite. The world needed the strait, and America was the only power willing and capable of taking it back. The strait is being reopened, the mines are being cleared, and when the first fully loaded commercial tanker passes through a verified American-cleared corridor on its way to a port that has nothing to do with Iran, the 47-day chapter in which Tehran held the world's oil supply at gunpoint will be over. What replaces it will not look like what came before. Iran will not hold the key to Hormuz in any peace agreement that Washington accepts. That key has already changed hands. Subscribe now and stay close. We are tracking this mine-clearing operation in real time. The moment a verified safe corridor is announced, the moment a diplomatic breakthrough or breakdown happens in Tehran, we will break it down completely. This is the most consequential naval operation of the 21st century, and it is not finished yet. Watch closely. Stay with us.